Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and I'm going to talk to you about test flying the Canadair CL-65. Now, this is a very interesting aircraft, and it has a very interesting background for a number of reasons, and I'm going to talk to you about that. One of them is they lost two aircraft in flight test, which is not a typical event to occur. Now, I flew this in the flight test November 1st, 1996, just under 2 hours, and the funny thing was, I went back looking in my notes to find when I flew this, and I didn't have it listed as an aircraft I had flown. Went to my logbooks. I never wrote this down. I did a flight evaluation on this aircraft, and I never put it in my logbook. Oh, how funny is that? Well, let me tell you some interesting things about this aircraft. It comes in a niche between where turboprops at the 0 to 300 mile range, although most people don't take a flight for 0 miles, but less than 300 mile range, the turboprops are more efficient, but 300 on up for short, long stage lengths, the jets are more efficient. And of course, I had done this flight evaluation, and we're coming back on it. We're actually riding on a CL-65 out of Montreal back to Chicago, and one of the passengers, I overheard him saying that he was very happy to be on this because it was a jet. And of course, this goes back to the old thing that jets are more safer than props. Well, that's not true. But anyway, that is the perception. But the interesting thing about this was, and it has to do with the two aircraft lost in flight tests. They had a flight test on 3 April 1980 out at the Mojave Desert, out next to Edwards out there, and that's when I had been stationed just shortly after I left in '79. So this accident occurred just shortly after I was out there. And it crashed due to a failure of the release mechanism. Now, see, it's got a T-tail there, and T-tails have a bad history. They have a bad deep stall history, and these guys got into a deep stall, and they couldn't release the recovery chute, which is kind of interesting on most fighters. If you have a spin chute or a deep stall chute or a loss of control type of chute, it'll usually rip off before you get a chance to release it. But they have a real high failure rate too, the spin chutes. But they couldn't release it. They got into a deep stall, and the other test pilot and the flight test engineer were able to exit the aircraft and parachute to safety. And that's kind of interesting, exiting an aircraft like this with a parachute. But unfortunately, one of the test pilots was not able to exit the aircraft and was killed. Now, interesting thing about this is it does not have leading edge devices. And so you incorporate higher approach speeds because no leading edge devices, and also a stall, unfavorable stall characteristic with the deep stall danger, if you will. It makes an aircraft that you had to have kind of higher approach speeds, which kind of hurt them for takeoff and landing performance. Another thing you'll note here is kind of the low wing clearance there. It has a very low wing, which being close to the ground like that, with ground effect, the airplane has a pronounced tendency to float in the flare. Back when this aircraft, the CL-65, first came out back in '93, it had very little competition. The Embraer 145 was the only jet in the class coming out, and I also did an evaluation on that, and I'll talk about that. Like I said, I'm doing these in order. But that picture there, let's break it down a little bit. That is a flight test aircraft, and the yellow arrow points to the trailing static source. It's reeled in right now. On a flight test aircraft, you'll reel that static source back. Depending on the aircraft and how much wake it generates, you can go back a couple 100 feet on that thing to get a good static source. And of course, the green arrow points to the extended pitot boom, which is out in front enough to make sure that you don't have any disturbance due to the bow wave off the airplane that is giving you inaccuracies in the airspeed. And of course, the red arrow points to the spin recovery chute that was very important in flight test. Now here is the original development of the aircraft from the Challenger. And I have a later slide here where I show how much they lengthen it, but basically they took a business jet and they made it into a regional aircraft. And of course, like I said, this is an interesting niche, and there's a lot of politics going on this, because at the time there was the 70-seat RJ limit on 70 seats. It had to be flown by mainline. It was a scope clause and stuff like that. And in fact, I'll talk about this later. I did a flight evaluation on an Embraer, on a BAE 146. Beautiful flying aircraft. Absolutely beautiful flying aircraft. I'll talk about that. But it was listed as the RJ100, and the ALPA president at the time had an absolute fit, and they refused to publish my flight review on that, which is kind of funny because we had ALPA members who were flying this aircraft, and it was a 100-seat aircraft, but it got published in their kind of local magazines, but you won't see it in the ALPA National Archives because it didn't get published. Oh, by the way, I am publishing the evaluation. And along with that evaluation is a very detailed report. We had a lot of buildup on this, a lot of meetings and that. And Dan Ford led a team of regional pilots who did a very extensive and thorough evaluation of a lot of the aspects of the cockpit design. And I'm also attaching that as an attached file that, if you're interested, you can download. So you can download the full magazine report and also that attached file, which I think is was very good and very informative. Now, the airplane we flew, unfortunately, was not a flight test aircraft, and anyway, we would not have done stalls in it, mainly because in this type of TTL aircraft with the tendency of a deep stall, it's essentially too dangerous to do on a non-specific flight. In flight tests they, especially with a history of the accidents. In flight tests, they approach this very carefully, and for our type of flight evaluation, this wasn't really necessary, so we didn't go into the stalls. And we were flying just a regular aircraft off the line, belonged to Comair, one that was available. But this is a very nice aircraft, 6 CRT system, and heads-up display. Now, the interesting thing about the heads-up display, and I had one of the people, a Canadian pilot, who was involved in the evaluation, said, I'm not a bad pilot, I've just had bad instrumentation. And with the heads-up display in the simulator, I flew first a Cat 1 approach, a Cat 2 approach, and then a Cat 3A approach, which has the 700-foot visibility limit. And it was amazing how well you could fly it. So I agree with him. If you have the proper instrumentation, I could hold the speed within 1 knot because it had very great trend arrows, and you just adjusted the throttles, and it worked. It worked great. Now, of course, the one thing about the regional jets that's always a problem is they typically aren't Cat 3 capable. Most of them are Cat 2, and if the weather goes down, all the connecting flights kind of go to heck. I was going into Denver one time, and this is a thing, okay, to tell you about. I never trust the weather forecasts. I mean, yeah, they're pretty good, but you always use a bit of confidence. Now, I was going from Chicago to Denver on a domestic 777 flight, 777-200, I think it was, the 345-seat A model. And the weather forecast was essentially Cat 3 before and Cat 3 after, but during our arrival time, it was supposed to be clear. And I'm looking at that and I'm going, if you guys are off, I'm going to be in big trouble here. And I'm talking dispatch, and I go, no, I need an alternate. I put on another 10,000 pounds of fuel, and I said, that's just too little of a window where it's going to be great when it's not now, and it's going to be bad afterwards. So I'm going on to Denver, and the weather is staying beautiful. This is just fine, and I'm starting the descent, and I'm thinking, well, I was too cautious on that. I added too much fuel, and all this stuff. So they were right, and as we were on the arrival, it came up on approach. They said, we just went Cat 3, and let me know who's not Cat 3 able. Well, we were in a pretty good line of aircraft going in there with a lot of the regional jets in front of us, and they were not Cat 3. So these guys are bailing left and right. They're going to their alternates and stuff like that. Colorado Springs got really full fast, and we proceeded on in and did a Cat 3 landing, and it was I think it was close to a Cat 3C. It was less than 700 feet. I mean, the visibility was just horrible. And those are the fun types to fly in an aircraft that has the ability with the auto land and that. It was really cool. I was flying the aircraft in, and then I'm deadheading back. So I'm changing into civilian clothes, and I'm going to deadhead back to Chicago on the very aircraft I flew in. And I'm sitting there, and I'm hearing passengers comment that boy, this aircraft made it in. How did it's one of the few ones that made it in, they were talking about the RJs, of course, but they're going, boy, this made it in this lousy weather, and they're pretty impressed. And so I'm sitting there kind of chuckling on the thing. And you can, like I said, you can read the more details in the flight evaluation. One thing I noted, and this is true on a lot of airplanes, this is pretty much a single engine taxi airplane because it just picks up speed. And I don't like going out with one engine in reverse while the other one's operating, until we get to the point where you need to warm up the engine for takeoff. Now, look at that young Studley pilot there with non-gray hair. This was a while ago. Okay. Very nice cockpit. I'll show you a little bit better pictures on that, but it was kind of interesting. The flight management system is an option on this aircraft. Okay, this is back in the mid to late 90s, so we're not getting as developed on a lot of these things as we should be, and especially with the regional jet aircraft, although it did have an optional Cat 3 capability, A, which is fairly impressive. And it also didn't have auto thrust system. It's amazing how used to that system we can get and how advantageous it is for setting climb power and stuff like that. So the FMS, they're doing a modification at this time. Okay, we're going back a ways where it will automatically calculate a climb thrust, but on this setup we didn't, and we had to set it manually. Okay, so we did a climb up to high altitude to do some high altitude, handling characteristics and descent stuff like that. I asked to do stalls if we could, and of course I knew I was kind of pressing it because this was a non-flight test aircraft and it has issues with the T-tail. So I was much braver back then. But it actually is not, practice stalls are prohibited in the flight manual. So not able to do this, and this was not an experimental aircraft certified anyway, so we couldn't do anything like that. But they do have a stall protection system of both a stick shaker and a stick pusher. Now, there have been some inadvertent actuations of stick pushers. So the good thing was, and I did this in the simulator, I found that I could override the stick pusher, and there's also a cutoff switch. So you can disable the thing, so if you have malfunctions, you're not fighting it trying to fly the aircraft. But being a T-tail aircraft and ungood stall characteristics, you can't actually do the typical 1.3 VSO like you'd do for a normal aircraft. You have to look at what's determined as a minimum control speed that they determine during flight test and adjust it from that. And they're being cautious here. I mean, you lose 2 aircraft in flight test, you're going to be a little cautious, right? So the speeds were a little high, and that hurt their takeoff and landing performance, obviously, because the faster your airplane comes in to land, the more runway you're going to chew up before you stop. So they're working on getting that down. Of course, the nice solution to that is have leading edge devices, but this wing, they told me, really did not have the room to put in leading edge devices. And as a result, on the approach, you got a little kind of a nice nose-low attitude. Now, a nose-low attitude of 2.5 degrees is nice because you can see better on a low visibility approach. And as the test pilot I was flying with said, every runway light counts. But I felt like I was flying my 310 again, because when I went from 8 degrees of flaps to 20, I got a very noticeable balloon. That's unfortunate, but you get used to that sort of thing. Let's see. Oh, one thing, I found the trim to be a little slow, and this is the article you can read in more detail. The other thing about this aircraft that's kind of unfortunate is it uses pneumatic thrust reversers. Now, those are not a common design feature, basically because they are so slow to deploy. And when I was doing some short field landings in this, I found that if you want to get the airplane stopped, you're on the brakes, and it has nice steel brakes that work well, but you're on the brakes quickly, and you get those thrust reversers out, and I am slowed down to 80 knots by the time those little suckers actually get working. So it's kind of like, yeah, what's the point? You really need to have hydraulic actuation to get the nice, quick deployment. And this also has a trailing link gear, which is nice for soft touchdowns, but that, like on a lot of the Cessna piston twins, can give you a little wallowing during taxi and a little wallowing in crosswinds. And when the thrust reverse came up unevenly on these engines, I got a little bit of wallowing out of that. So yeah, kind of interesting. And one of the things pointed out, this has its roots in corporate aircraft. And one of the things pointed out in the report, among many things, is the engine fire switch is mounted on the front glare shield. It's not one of the typical pull handles like you do on most airliners. It was a switch, and it was very near an identically shaped stall warning system switch. And that's just something you don't like. You don't like similar switches that do very different things mounted close to each other. But it was a very nice flying aircraft and fits a very good need. And we had a very nice flight evaluation. Now, let me tell you something funny here about this flight evaluation. All right, there's me in the left seat, and in the right seat is Jim Betcher. Now, those of you who have been Edwards in flight tests, Jim was the commander of the test ops squadron out at Edwards. And I was assigned when I was out at Edwards. He was there after I was there, but I was assigned to the test ops squadron. So Jim would have essentially been my boss if the timing had been different. And there is the two of us there, and you notice that 4 foot 11-inch wing distance from the ground there. I think you see, and you see it's a Comair aircraft that we were using. And here, of course, I'm pointing. No, I didn't get too much bank and bend the wingtip up. But it's kind of interesting, Jim would have been my boss, and now he's a member of my committee. Like I said, I had absolutely great people on my new aircraft evaluation and certification committee. I couldn't ask for a better bunch of pilots. And, with the airlines, I got hired. I left the Air Force because they wanted to put me in a ground job, and I got hired at 29. Well, a lot of people went in full careers, and then they come on. So I'm captain on the 737, and I've got a 2-star general as my co-pilot. I mean, back when I was in the Air Force, a 1-star general was, a god level and above. So yeah, that's kind of interesting in how things change. That's why you don't want to ever screw anybody over in aviation, and you always want to treat people with respect, because you never know how things may change in the lineup of position authority and stuff like that. You just don't want to ever screw over people in aviation, because first of all, it's just not a nice thing to do, and it's stupid, and it can come back to bite you. That's why you don't cross a picket line either. But that's in other discussions. All right, now look at those young studly people there. Now, on the far left of the picture there, down there, is Jim Betcher, of course. Next to him is Bob Hall, who was our staff engineer at the Airline Pilots Association. I always had a staff engineer for the committee, and he coordinated a lot of stuff, set up the meetings, did all this stuff. Greatly helpful. And before Bob went on to bigger and better things, we got him one flight. Bob had been an F-105 pilot, a Thud pilot in Vietnam, very prestigious position. And he's a pilot, but being the staff engineer and not an airline pilot, he typically didn't get to fly on any of these evaluations. But we got him a little bit of stick time thanks to the manufacturer on, I believe it was the MD-90, before he went on to bigger and better things. And of course, there's me in the center position there, and then we have the Bombardier flight test and operational people next to us. And there's the group, just the three of us, me, Bob Hall, and Jim Betcher. Now, this is a picture of the flight test cockpit at the time when the airplane was undergoing flight test. And the thing is, you can tell it's a flight test aircraft because there are a bunch of red things in there. That's what you do on flight test aircraft. The wiring is red or orange. That's flight test wiring, usually for instrumentation. And anything specific to flight test is typically in a different color. Now there is a typical picture of the cockpit. And you notice those nice 6 CRTs across there. I mean, just a really nice cockpit layout. And there's the passenger cabin, very very nice and comfortable. And of course, they give us very detailed briefings on the aircraft, and we've had a number of meetings and a number of flights in the simulator before we go up in the aircraft, so we're quite familiar with it. And this is basically they took the Challenger 600 and lengthened it to be a regional jet. And for those of you who are interested, there's the basic parameters there. It's a 47,000-pound aircraft. And there's the aircraft performance figures and some payload range information. Very nice, straightforward fuel system. It uses ejector pumps, which operate without typically an excessive power demand, let's put it that way. And they have electric boost pumps for backup, automatic fuel transfer controlled by a computer. You can also do manual transfer, of course. And of course, the manufacturer is going to tell you it's extremely reliable. Nice hydraulic system, 3 completely independent systems, 2 pumps per system. Yeah, designed to operate 205 degrees. Well, okay, that's wonderful. That's not going to get my attention too much. I'm going to stay at the hotel on that one. And spoiler system, very nice. Controlled by 2 computers, 2 channels. You can dispatch with a failed channel, 4 surfaces per wing, and you get a high roll rate with the spoilerons, they called it. And then we have the flap system, a nice double-slotted trailing edge flap. Too bad they don't have the leading edge devices, of course, on this brand, and they pay for that later on. With the follow-on aircraft, they were able to get those in there, and it, of course, makes a lot of nice improvement. NII system, because low-wing aircraft with tail-mounted engines had at the time historically not good ice performance. And it has a nice ice detection system. Fire protection was nice, sophisticated too. They have both engine overheat and fire detection, and the nacelles, the jet pipe, and the pylon. Also for the APU overheat and fire, and the main gear in case you have a wheel well fire, because that is a significant issue that has brought aircraft down. And the lavatory overheat and smoke detection. Well, back in the day when smoking was outlawed on the aircraft, people would go back into the restrooms and smoke. That was always a hazard. And of course, being the good citizens they were, they would tend to throw their cigarette butts in the trash. And if that isn't a setup for disaster, so that's why all the trash cans have these little balls above them that you typically don't see, of course, because they're behind the panel, but they have those set up there so it has a little tip on the end that melts with heat, and it discharges it to put out the fire. And of course, 2 halon bottles per engine, 2 squibs per engine bottle, so you make sure you do get the thing to fire. 1 APU bottle, and a cargo extinguishing system, which is also very important, and 3 portable fire extinguishers. They were kind of, I guess, anticipating. Well, they've always had fire extinguishers, typically on commercial aircraft, but we're anticipating the laptop fires here, I guess. Very sophisticated APU, electrical power up to 350, air conditioning up to 150, and thing can operate unattended, and it will take care of itself, shutting down if there's a problem. And the crew alerting system, the electronic crew indicating and crew alerting system, is very nice, detailed schematic, and they're also interactive, which is very important. So when you change your switch, it shows up on the depiction here. Communication package, fairly standard there. Optional cell call, that's selective calling so the company can get a hold of you there. And of course the cockpit voice recorder, which is required, things like that. Navigation package, very good, with a nice AHAR system and other aspects of the navigation system. And of course you get the various ATC with mode AC, mode S, weather radar. And there's more information on the navigation package. It also has the TCAS, and it displays on the TCAS the resolution advisory, the traffic advisory, and then the resolution advisory if that becomes necessary. And it also, of course, has the standard ground proc system integrated into it. And this, of course, optional flight management system. Well, I am so spoiled by that. I mean, I somehow I survived in my 310 without one. Although my avionics package is quite sophisticated with two Q500s, a GTN 650, 750, and that. It's a very nice package, but doesn't have a flight management system. Ran out of money on that one. But anyway. Very detailed Collins, off the Collins FMS 4100E system, and has the automatic flight controls, Cat 2 fail passive autopilot, 2 independent flight directors, independent yaw dampers, and this is more information on the automatic flight control guidance modes. And of course the flight director. Now you want to get pilots arguing about flight directors. Ask them which they like better, the single Q V bars or the dual Q crosshairs. And we had quite a bit of divergence on this. The 27 had the dual Q and the single Q. Sometimes you'd intermix the two because we had some older aircraft. I always liked the single Q, but supposedly they said the dual Q could be more accurate. And of course the autopilot is certified Cat 2 at 100 feet. And the other information on yaw dampers. Now, I really like the heads-up display. Nice for Cat 3A landings, which gets you down to 700 feet, RVR, and a 50-foot decision height. You got approach monitoring by the heads-up display. And there's basically a Cat 3A depiction at 150 feet coming in. If you're flying it manually, you line up the two circles, one inside the other there, if you can see it on the left, and you have the little arrows on the wingtips that give you the acceleration information. So anyway, that's the history of the CL-65 entering service in the mid to late 90s. Getting the jet aircraft for people who thought propellers were unsafe, all the passenger perception of safety, and providing a very nice aircraft and start to the regional aircraft that have developed into actually some very nice aircraft, almost mini 737. So anyway, thanks for watching. That's the CL-65 story. I hope you enjoyed it.